People who knew someone who died in a freak accident. What happened? Story 1. I was snowboarding in 1997 in Switzerland with a good friend who was skiing. I had caught an edge and landed on the back of my head while also twisting my knee badly. I was being looked over by the mountain rescue and first aid, telling my friend he could keep skiing and I would head back to our villa. I ended up going to sleep at around 6 p.m. as I had a hot shower and some Tylenol 3s after dinner. I woke up to see my friend hadn't returned and thought it was odd, but maybe he hooked up with a lady at some bar. My friend never came back from skiing. He was found deep in a crevasse the next afternoon and frozen to death. Story 2. I used to work for a septic company. A guy who drove one of the big septic trucks that sucked out underground septic tanks at people's houses had to get on his hands and knees and reach into the tank because the lid had fallen in. He lost his balance and fell head first in. His shoulders got wedged in the opening and he drowned upside down in human waste. I don't think I've ever heard of a worse way to go. The homeowner found him after about an hour. Story 3. If you live in corn-heavy Midwest areas of America, we are probably familiar with detasseling. Detasseling is a job a lot of smaller towns will let kids do, I think from 13 and up, with parental permission, and it's very common where I'm from. Essentially, you just walk with a group of other people through cornfields, pulling the tassel off the top to prevent them from germinating and seeding excessively. Anyway, like 2 years after I did it, there was an accident involving 2 high school freshmen stepping into a puddle that an electric irrigator was shorting into. One of them basically passed away immediately, the other en route. Story 4. Not much of an accident, I suppose, but my little brother suffered from type 1 diabetes. Gotta take insulin shots frequently every day. He'd had it for 15 years, but still barely made an effort to handle it because he never got comfortable with having to inject himself daily. One evening, he went to bed with low blood sugar, something he'd admitted to doing many times before that we'd scolded him constantly and warned him that it would off him, and just didn't wake up the next day. I saw him on the 5th and found out he was gone by the 8th. If it had been my mother or father, it would have made sense, but to lose my baby brother so suddenly just feels so wrong. Edit. Keep your loved ones close, and if they have medical conditions, make sure that they have safety nets and contingencies in place too. All it takes is one night with low or even high blood sugar, and it could be over. Diabetes management is definitely not easy, and it's understandable why he might have had difficulty coming to terms with it, but it's also a stark reminder of how important it is to take health conditions seriously, no matter how invincible we might feel. We all need to be proactive about our health, not just for our own sake, but for our loved ones too. They are the ones left to deal with the pain of loss when things go wrong. Story 5. An old buddy I had known since elementary school passed away while driving when a chunk of loose gravel was kicked up through his windshield by a passing truck on the freeway. His best friend had been riding in the passenger side and had to steer the car to safety. It was nobody's fault, just a complete accident. I've always felt terrible for the friend who had to watch it happen. I think about my friend who passed away a lot as he was a really cool guy. I still remember playing basketball with him during recess when we were kids. It's strange to think that he never could have known how his life would end or seen it coming in any way. That kid I used to play basketball with thought he had his entire life ahead of him. Story 6. I was in high school and working retail at a chain furniture store while 2 of my coworkers were sisters. Their mother was in charge of the special ed program at my high school, and she had been diagnosed with brain cancer a couple of years ago. She was in remission. Once, she came to work to pick up her 2 daughters and go to her follow-up appointment to make sure still no cancer. Not long after they left and got to an interstate, an 18-wheeler lost control after jumping the median and hitting their car, killing everyone. Her husband was working and could not go to the appointment. He lost his wife and 2 daughters in a second, and his whole family was gone because an 8-wheeler lost control. Story 7. A pretty rough set of downhill S-turns for trucks on a 2-lane road, with plenty of memorials. While my friend and her mother are going up the hill, a flatbed coming down the hill was loaded with rebar going into angel gears and was arriving at the same bend as my friend and her mother. The bands of the truck holding the rebar snapped from the force of the turn, sending an open spoil of half-inch rebar spearing through the driver's side of the front window, leaving the daughter untouched in the passenger. For the mother was not instantaneous. To add salt to the wound, she had just finished convincing her mom to take her to get a skateboard so she could hang with her skater friends, me and others. Story 8. The kid I was friends with in middle school was riding his bike without a helmet, hit a rock, and went head over handlebars right at a T intersection. As he was getting up, an old lady driving on the cross street somehow dropped her glasses and bent over to pick them up. Didn't see him. The coroner said that Nick would have survived either crash on its own, but the compilation of the two ended him. He used to sneak into class early before school and draw a little flower pot with a cartoon daisy in it, and then he'd write the words, "Hello, flower," under it. He must have done that 100 times. The day after he passed away, the teacher let the whole class draw a hello flower on the chalkboard. Story 9. The kid I was friends with in high school decided to run away from home. He was upset that he didn't have enough money to get a bus ticket to where he wanted to go and threw down his duffel bag in disgust. The handgun he had went off and it shot him in the stomach. His parents hosted a week-long camping and binge-drinking wake for all of us after the funeral. I developed a taste for Jägermeister during that time. By the way, this was pre-Columbine in Arizona, and this guy would regularly show up to school with different knives and/or guns. Please don't assume that he had any inkling of proper gun handling, much less the give a fuck to follow it if he did know it. Imagine if Butthead was an actual real person. Now give them about 2 more IQ points and the amazing ability to get super hot girlfriends, and then you'll have a better image of who this kid actually was. Yes, it was a regular thing for high school kids to get trashed. It was illegal, but not nearly as enforced or frowned upon in the early 90s as it is now. Reply 1. I am by no means pro-gun, but when you handle and store a loaded gun correctly every time, there's very little risk of one just going off. I have seen many a dropped gun not go off. 10 to 1, this kid either didn't have the safety on and the trigger caught on something, or he didn't have it in a proper case and something in the bag rubbed against the gun and pushed the safety off. It's so sad that this accident could have been prevented if this kid had followed basic gun safety rules. It's deeply unfortunate to hear about the choices and the fate of this young man. When we're young, we often feel invincible, oblivious to the consequences of our actions, and this story is a grim illustration of that fact. Irresponsible handling of firearms, negligence, and a reckless disregard for safety rules can lead to tragic outcomes. Story 10. This happened a long time ago, but a neighbor was trying to weld a gas tank and didn't realize that he should have filled it with water beforehand. The tank exploded and ended him. Story 11. Don't know if this counts as a freak accident, but when we were in high school, UK, we were all at a house party drinking. Got to around midnight and someone suggested we acquire a certain white powder. A guy a year younger than us at the time, so 15, said he knew somebody his older brother got it from, made a phone call, and off he went to collect it. We carry on drinking, dancing, laughing, etc. Nearly 2 hours go by and we realize this guy hasn't returned, but we gave him the money. We quickly conclude he's done us dirty and ran off with the cash. We get his number from a lass he came with who was still at the party and ringing him. She said she'd been ringing him for about an hour or so and hasn't been answering, but never mentioned anything as she was scared that he might have bounced with the money also. He doesn't answer the phone, so we went out looking for him. There are alleyways behind the gardens of the house we were at. Go through the garden into the alley. There is said guy slumped on the floor, eyes opened, not breathing. Turns out he met the dealer, who gave him a few bumps of the stuff to try and ended up giving him the wrong bag. Never found out what was in the bag, and this kid had overdosed right outside the back gate and choked on his own vomit. The dealer ran off and left him, but he got caught through phone records later down the line. However, there was some bull about his alibi stating he never turned up to meet him or something. He did time for possession, and that's it, I believe. Was a long time ago. By the way, a kid tries to buy one substance and accidentally gets given another, ODs and chokes on their own vomit 5 meters from the house. Story 12. 2 laborers driving back from a work site hit a rock in the darkness and were unable to free the vehicle. It was the most unlucky series of events we had ever come across. They would have been rescued if they were able to radio in, but their GSMR radio's batteries had fallen flat from using it all day performing crane operations. They also didn't pack the charging cable it came with. It would have had a cigarette lighter adapter on it to charge in the vehicle. On top of all of that, they were in a location with no cell phone coverage and about 100 kilometers away from anybody in the Arabian desert. The emergency alarm button located in the vehicle hadn't been installed, as it was one of the few fleets of pickups, and it was waiting an appointment to be fitted. This was the Thursday night, which is the start of the weekend, and so nobody checked on them as everybody who lived on their compounds was busy relaxing and enjoying the day off. They slept in the pickup overnight and must have spent all day Friday and Saturday attempting to free the vehicle from the rock. At one point, it appeared they tried to use their shovels and the cart jack for leverage. We were never sure why they didn't just attempt to start walking at least, but in 40-degree conditions, it's easy to see why they would be less inclined to leave the safety of the truck. On Sunday morning, after several attempts to make contact with the two workers, the team leader decided to drive along the railway and through the known routes to find the team. He was unfortunately met with the truck still stuck on the rock and the two workers passed away, having run out of water and unable to contact anyone. One of the workers lay inside the pickup and the other took a rest under the truck. That incident changed a lot of how we managed teams going forward. It really shook everybody to the core. These two workers were from the Philippines and came to the Middle East to earn money for their families. It's unfortunate they had to go out that way. They were extremely unlucky with all of the worst-case scenarios lining up. But sometimes that's all it takes. Never say never. Story 13. I lived next door to a super nice older couple while growing up. The man spent his entire life on the Mississippi River, and he would build his own canoes and take them down the entire river in the summer, then drive back up. One spring, while in his 80s, he was canoeing by a park in the backwater area, smaller offshoots of the river. This particular spot has a small dam, and he happened to get too close and it flipped his canoe. He was held under by the current and drowned. It was sad to hear that he passed away, but he passed away doing what he loved. Another story about the same man. When I was in middle school, his wife came running over one winter morning screaming for my mom. He had been snowblowing the driveway when the snowblower jammed and reached in to clear it out without turning it off first. He ended up losing a couple of fingers, so my mom drove them to the hospital while my brother and I finished shoveling. We had strict instructions to call if we found the fingers so they could be reattached. Thankfully, we didn't because that would have been scarring for kids our age. Whoa, what a life this man led. His adventurous spirit, evident in his brave and perhaps a bit risky exploits, is a compelling reminder to seize the day and live life to the fullest. The other incident you mentioned is just as unsettling. It's scary to think about how a moment's carelessness or lack of safety can lead to such life-altering accidents. It serves as an essential reminder of the importance of safety, especially when operating machinery. Story 14. A friend slipped and fell in the tub, cracking his head. His roommate found him half an hour later. He passed away on the way to the hospital. Story 15. My grandpa was 76, and once he was boating off the Potomac River, and they were docking, but there was too much slack in the dock rope. As he was stepping off the boat, it moved away from the dock, and he fell between the dock and the boat and got beat up and went underwater. The current was swift there, and he came up for air, hollering for help once, then went back under. They didn't find him for hours. He drowned in the Potomac. That phone call from my mom still haunts me. Hardest day I've ever had to grieve. Even harder was having to go down there and pick up his car. Also, it took them 3 days to transfer his body home. He was bloating in Northern Neck, VA, a few hours from home. Makes me sick too. His house was immaculate, and none of us could afford a second mortgage, so we had to sell it. The new owners absolutely destroyed it, and it went to foreclosure and is definitely gutted inside, and they destroyed the pool and pool house. Story 16. When I was a teenager, 10 years ago or so, my babysitter, a sweet middle-aged woman with a husband and 3 college-age children from when I was a child, passed away. Apparently, she was at a friend's house and went to go to the bathroom. She opened the door and the room was dark, so she stepped in to find the light switch. Turns out it was actually the stairs to the basement, and she fell to the bottom and hit her head really badly. If I remember correctly, she was in a coma-like state for a few days and then passed away. Since I was still a kid, some details were probably left out. I don't even think there was a funeral for her because she was Jehovah's Witness. I haven't heard from any of her family since, and I drove by her house a few months ago just to find that it's vandalized and the yard looks like a jungle. Apparently, her husband passed away a few months ago and no one is taking care of the house. It's just sad altogether. I'm obviously way over this, but I still miss the way she said my name. Story 17. Just a month ago, a friend was riding his Harley home from work. Some meatball kid tried to slipstream around traffic, didn't see him, and nicked his bike. He passed away from the crash and road rash because he was wearing a beanie helmet and the road ripped off his jawline and he bled out before the EMS could get there. In college, a pal of mine was riding one of those open-top Jeeps around some mountain ledges. His dog, who was harnessed in, did something, they thought, and distracted him. The Jeep hit the inside wall, then careened to the cliff barrier, and he popped out of his seatbelt, over the hood, and fell 100 feet into the ravine. His hand was still in the dog's harness, with the dog in the Jeep. And last, a high school friend of my brother's in the middle 1980s stopped to help someone with a flat tire. While he kneeled to look at the flat, the other driver shot him in the back of his head. That car was stolen, and the murderer stole his car, which they found days later and hundreds of miles away. The case was never solved. Story 18. My cousin was killed by Chrysler. There was a defect in the hatch of Chrysler minivans, where if they were hit from the inside, they would open unexpectedly. My aunt was moving the car out of the driveway so the other kids could play hockey or whatever, just backing the car into the street. She put my cousin in the back so he wouldn't run behind the car as she pulled out. They lived on a little cul-de-sac, no danger of other vehicles. One of the kids called her name, so she hit the brakes. My cousin lost his balance and hit the inside of the hatch, which opened. He fell out and hit his head, and was taken off life support 3 days later. It later came out that this issue was raised by an engineer, and when he wouldn't drop it, Chrysler fired him rather than fixing it. From a very young age, I have understood that corporations don't give a fuck about anything but money. Every pride flag, every we stand with X community, every donation to a charity, all calculated efforts to maximize revenue. Nothing more. Don't ever kneel at the corporate altar. They can all burn for all I care. Story 19. When I worked on load at UPS, one of the other loaders tried to race a trailer and save a package and got pinched on the loading dock. When you've loaded a trailer and it pulls out, some of the doors don't close because they swing open instead of being pulled down like a garage door. Sometimes the package will fall out. The trailers move really fast and the drivers don't have a lot of visibility, so you're never supposed to jump down and save a package. A lot of people do it anyway. This guy wasn't quick enough and he got caught between the dock and the deck of the new trailer. It pinched him in half basically, but they kept the trailer there long enough for him to call his family before he passed away. Basically, the second the trailer pulled out and relieved pressure, those two arteries that feed blood to your legs just dumped it out, and that was it for him. Not a good day at work. I never jumped for a package again. This is a terrible, tragic story. Hearing about such accidents is a stark reminder of the importance of safety procedures in the workplace. They are in place for a reason, even though they might sometimes seem overly cautious or inconvenient. It's deeply unsettling that a small decision like attempting to save a package could result in such a catastrophic outcome. Story 20. The guy in my class at university is in class on Tuesday. That night he had a house party and got drunk and climbed out of a window to tap dance on a skylight. The glass broke and he fell through to the hardware store below. His flatmates took him to the hospital and were discharged. Feeling not great but okay, so he went for a lie down with a headache. Woke up, vomited, and lost consciousness. Massive brain hemorrhage. A lot of people at the university just sneered because it was such a stupid thing to do, but 15 years on it just seems so unfair. He passed away being an idiotic 21-year-old, but a lot of other idiotic 21-year-olds get to grow up. I knew one guy who also fell out of a first-floor window on the same street at a different party a few weeks later, and he just got a concussion. It's not fair. I don't think of Alex often, but when I do, I feel such sorrow.
Please leave your story down below in the comments. I would absolutely love to make a video about them in the future. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, peace.